I've got your energy story for the second week of December 2025. Well, from December 4th to December 10th, the PJM Interconnect's Base Residual Auction is taking place to ensure sufficient capacity for the power delivery year starting June of 2027. First of all, why the heck does every grid operator have to have such arcane names for everything? It's like the legal profession with all of its strange, inscrutable, and frankly stupid language, seemingly meant to ensure we cannot understand it. Per Google's Gemini, the base residual auction is called that because it's the base auction in PJM's market held to procure the majority of needed electric capacity for future delivery years. These typically take place 3 years ahead of time, with incremental auctions that occur later on to fill any gaps. Usually, these auctions, held by PJM to cover its 13-state territory, are ignored by the rest of us because they're somewhat arcane, and in the past, they also didn't impact energy prices all that much. But in November of 2022, something took place that would eventually change all of that. OpenAI launched ChatGPT, and the AI butterfly began quietly flapping its wings. That event stimulated a great deal of activity in the space among other AI developers, even as chip manufacturer Nvidia began manufacturing increasingly more powerful and energy-hungry chips to satisfy this burgeoning AI demand. Soon, the butterfly effect on the power industry became remarkably pronounced. In some states, like Georgia, Indiana, Texas, Ohio, and Virginia, data center loads soared. At least projected data center load did. Ohio and Virginia load sit within PJM, and suddenly the demand forecasts there that have been stagnant for over a decade started ramping up quickly. PJM's sclerotic supply side of the equation did not keep pace with its interminable interconnection queues, and the grid operator re-rated all of the supply assets to better reflect their ability to meet demand under high-stress conditions. That effort was prompted by deficiencies that occurred during Winter Storm Elliot's unhappy surprise in late December of 2022. Then, numerous assets did not show up to the pre-Christmas party, with gas-fired generation scrooging up big time. In fact, nearly 40 gigawatts of gas failed to show up during the worst part of that shortage. So with existing supply derated, almost nothing new being built, and an expanding forecast for data center loads, you have the classic Econ 101 price setting. Take a supply curve that barely budges and shift the demand curve to the right, and voila, higher prices. Those prices started to show up in July of 2024, with the auction for the 2025-2026 delivery year that started June 1st. If you had to pay for capacity, prices were ugly. In fact, they soared from a 3-year average of $37.68 per megawatt day to $269.92. And naturally, this invited a political uproar. So, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro negotiated a deal with PJM that was blessed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to put a collar on prices, with a nominal floor of roughly $175 and a ceiling of $325. That was to take place for 2 years. The following auction for the 2026-27 delivery year occurred this past July, and Shapiro's actions were prescient and paid off. The clearing price came in at $329.17, the actual approved FERC cap once updated with specific auction parameters. And that price was a shocker to most, but when PJM ran a simulated auction without the cap, prices soared even higher to over $388 per megawatt day. One would think that the 2027-2028 auction would have occurred a year later. But since there had been so much regulatory tussle between PJM and FERC in prior years, capacity auctions have been delayed, so long, in fact, they'll now take place every 6 months until the end of 2026. So the next one, for the 2028-29 year, is now docketed for May of 2026. And significantly, as things stand today, the cap only covers that auction that's taking place as I speak. Then, the gloves come off and anything goes in the form of prices. The 2029-2030 auction is set to take place in December of 2026, and it doesn't have a cap or floor either. And the next one then returns back to the 3-year advanced schedule. Got it? So what's the problem with a truncated schedule? Well, the whole point of competitive markets is to set price signals that elicit an elastic response. If the cost of bread, for example, goes up 50%, more bakers jump into action. Same dynamic applies to eggs, t-shirts. It should apply to electricity supply assets as well. The problem is that those prices need to be set far enough out in front to give developers sufficient time to put those assets into play. But now, with interconnection queues and supply chains being what they are, that supply response doesn't happen. Meanwhile, that expected growth in PJM demand stemming from data centers, that's now pushed up the forecast by 30 gigawatts. For context, last June's peak demand in PJM was 160 gigawatts. And it's that expected growth that is causing this massive inflationary push. Data load, both existing and forecasted, is calculated by the third-party independent market monitor, whose job is to police the grid, to have cost all the loads a whopping $16.6 billion over the past two auctions, over half the total revenues that will be paid. This now represents a quarter of the entire competitive supply bill, so of course it's become a political hot potato, with many of the state governors recently signing a letter indicating their lack of confidence in PJM's leadership, and other large energy consumers getting into the game as well as they fight for their own interests. Last month, after fielding multiple proposals in an effort to address the massive new data demand, PJM stakeholders couldn't agree on a path forward in terms of how to approach new interconnection proposals. What seems clear is there is absolutely no way PJM can meet firm demand, so there has to be more flexibility built into the system. And this goes well beyond the concept of data centers moderating demand during peak periods, and more into the realm of the so-called BYOG, or bring your own generation, or at least bring your own capacity during peak periods. Meanwhile, the Department of Energy has also stepped into the fray, with Secretary Wright in November directing the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to develop a one-size-fits-all approach to the interconnection issue that would address the entire country. Naturally, the states immediately began pushing back on that one, arguing that such an approach steps on regulatory authority of the states in a very significant way. The speed with which these new loads have emerged, combined with their enormous magnitudes, will test the physical grid and its regulatory framework in ways we've never seen before. The pressures related to data centers and their impacts on the grid appear close to a boiling point, and the results of the ongoing auction, to be released on December 17th, might just cause the lid to pop off the pot. Well, that's all for this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.